So my next question is, what is your stance on the current uniform policy in DPSCD alongside the strict dress code?
Well, let's start with the uniforms. One, when I was in high school, we didn't have uniforms. Uh, I do not enjoy students having to wear uniforms um, for a few reasons. I don't know that it was a parent choice where I can say for my children, it wasn't a parent choice. You come and this is what it is. Um, I also believe that it's certainly okay to have certain restrictions of what we can wear. It's a part of life. There are certain things that I have to wear. I can't wear to the office as a professional, and it's certainly okay to have certain parameters around what we wear, as long as it's not violating any individual's rights. I will go there with that. But again, uniforms aren't necessary from my perspective. It allows our individuality of style allows our youth to come into their own, to be able to determine what it is that they enjoy about, style and fashion. I like to think that Detroit is one of the fashion spots, one in the country, quite frankly. And so uniforms really aren't necessary from in my perspective. And I know to some degree people might be like, well, it's cost savings, not necessarily. And we know that some students aren't able to afford uniforms, which I've talked to some parents to some reasons why they don't start school or go to school because they can't afford them. So um, uniforms aren't a priority, I'll say. I think there's more things that we can focus on for the good of the student than everybody looking the same.
My when you understand the culture of DPSCD, and you understand the concerns of parents, and that's what drives us. It has to be parents speak very loudly, and their young people speak very loudly. That issue of uniforms is almost half and half. You have half of the parents and young people that say we want uniforms, and you probably have another 40%, 45% that say we don't want uniforms at all. And so we have been very lenient when it comes to high schoolers and uniforms, whereas most of our high school principals are much more fluid when it comes to whether or not their body of students have to wear uniforms. And surprisingly enough, even when the principals are a little bit more lenient, some high school students just prefer to wear the uniforms. But within the high school context, it's perfectly all right. So if you go to any of our high schools, you will see that there is no strict uniform requirement. However, we do have a dress code. And that is one of the policies because of, again, the economic culture in which we serve, as well as we believe that dressing should not be the primary reason you come to school. That the primary reason you come to school is to be educated. So as much emphasis that can be put on education without distractions is going to create, I think, a better student achievement. So in the middle schools and in the elementary schools, uniforms are still a requirement because it certainly relieves economic responsibilities in the families, because if you buy the uniforms, you don't have to buy a lot of school clothes, and that helps with students. But when you start getting into the high school, we certainly have given more freedom. Dress codes, I think, are very necessary. I'm a parent and a grandparent, and you'd be surprised how outlandish some dressing can become. And then it becomes the foci of the educational process and not the education itself. And so I remember a time when there was no uniform code, and then I remember when there was. And so you have parents that say, yes, I need uniforms because I know what my children are going to wear every day. And then you have another group of people that say, I think particularly young people who drive this, we want to wear what we want to wear. So I think that in each school building, even though we have a policy with uniforms, we're a lot more lenient, but it is going to be principal and parent driven.
Yeah, so I'm really flexible with the uniform policy, but I can understand if high school students think that we should take a deep dive into maybe altering the uniform policy. Do I feel that way for the younger children? Probably not really, but I can be convinced. So you got to understand my background. My background is a middle school principal. I was also an elementary principal. And so when I served as principal, middle school students may have had on yellow. If they were in 6th grade, 7th grade may have had on white, and 8th grade may have had on blue. So it wasn't about the prison mentality. It was about me knowing that a 7th grade student was in the 6th grade hallway wing. And my question would be, what are you doing there? Okay. And that you need to go back to your section unless you have a special pass to learn with this section on this given day. I wasn't trying to put anybody in prison. It was just a sense of order. Okay. But what I heard is that high school students maybe think it puts kids on the prison route or makes them think that they're there. I'm sorry to hear that. I never made mine feel that way. In fact, you would get treats and everything if you had on your uniform. But when it gets to be too much, it's probably in high school. Okay. And so I'm flexible and I'm willing to listen to your rationale for why we should change it for middle school. It was funny. I went to Bates Immaculata on Monday, and most of the kids had on their uniforms. Some didn't have it on. And the parents were like, oh, I didn't know they had an option. They don't have to wear the uniform. So parents don't seem to want them to do it. So see, life changes depending on what era we're in, okay? And so this is 2022. And so if we don't want uniforms, then we need to review why we don't want them, what are the pros, what are the cons, and so on and so forth. So I'm really flexible, but it worked for me back then. It kept my building orderly, and that's why I worked it that way. But I'm open, and I'm sure we'll be talking to high school students a lot about changing the uniform policy. So we're gonna have to look at it. My president and I looked at it from a perspective of president and vice president, but it's not our call. It belongs to the other 5 members as well. And so you'd have 7, but you wouldn't get me saying, don't do it, don't do it. I'm not like that. I want to hear the facts and then make a decision. That'll be good, safe, healthy, etc. for our kids. I'm open.
Thank you for being open. We always appreciate that. And I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, I know.
The next question that I have is DPSCD.
Uniforms and or requests for a certain kind of unity in dressing brings about another level of discipline, another level of self-control that can be exerted, and accountability and responsibility for the students. So that a dress code does not just, or a uniform code is just not for the purpose of just saying everybody wear the same thing, but what are some of the messages behind the fact that you're asking them to do that? By the same token, as the students start to mature, I think you can build a framework that says within this framework, here's the contents that we consider to be respectful and appropriate dress, so that the focus in the school is on learning and not on the conversation of what people have on every day when they come.
Thank you.
Entire demographics of the population.
When I was on the school board, we initiate a uniform policy. For me, as an educator and as a person concerned about our children having issues, our students having issues with having all this designer stuff, and having issues with people trying to steal it, hurt them. I don't want that. So the uniforms sort of help eliminate that problem, but we had it set up so that the schools could determine what type of uniform they wanted. That's number one. Everybody had to have a uniform, but the schools could determine, for example, the color and all that other stuff. But in terms of being strict with the uniforms, I don't believe in suspension of our students. The ACLU some years ago did a report showing how we have the suspension, the prison to pipeline, school to prison pipeline. That was kind of the name of the study. And they showed that at DPS, we're suspending kids, and the kids are getting into trouble when they're out of school, and then they end up in prison. As you all know, we have too many youth in prison. And so I'm not a supporter of suspending kids. Rather than do that, there's a better way to handle that. You have some extra uniforms at the school. The child goes to the bathroom, change into the right uniform, and continue with his or her education. So I'm not for suspending children for not having a uniform, because one, it disrupts the educational process for them, and it sets them up to get in trouble because there's nobody at home. So many parents, both parents are working. So it doesn't make sense to me. It's better to look for a win-win way than this whole notion of suspension.